Welcome to the third Peachtree MG Register tech session today. After the introduction video, this is a good time to start. I would like to introduce the people that are going to do this tech session today. First, we have Jeff Jones, who is going to be the welding expert and instructor today. And we are at the house of John Scarpucci. We are actually in John Scarpucci's garage, which is a two-car residential garage. Luckily, it is a bright and sunny day, so the car that we're going to work on is facing outwards, and where we will be welding, we'll be standing outside in the sunshine. I like John's garage. It's a regular two-car garage. What I like particularly in John's garage, and I don't know if you can see that in the back there, there's a heating unit that John had just installed. And I was here earlier this year when it was cold outside, and it was nice and toasty in this garage. So even with a little unit like that, you can easily heat up a two-car garage to a comfortable temperature to work in the wintertime.
And that exterior wall isn't insulated.
And the walls, John adds, are not particularly insulated. It's an attached garage, but it's a very good unit. And unfortunately, I'm not able to zoom in right now, but maybe you can see it on the ceiling there in the back. After that, we do another Zoom tech session today. And we are on Zoom because we still have COVID around. Although several of us have been vaccinated 2 times, and according to the experts, we can be together. I still don't think it's a good idea to have 20 people under the hood of one MG trying to adjust the points and see what somebody is doing close by. So I think for the time being, we'll still be on Zoom for a little bit. Speaking of coronavirus or COVID, at this time in the pandemic, just about everybody of us will probably know somebody who has or had or maybe lost someone. We have somebody in our club by the name of Tim Gaffney, who had all kind of complications from COVID. And I'm just trying to make a pitch, whether you know or don't know Tim very well. Tim has a beautiful 59 red MGA coupe. You may know his wife, Teresa, who is a singer-songwriter who plays at Billard at the campfire. Send Jim a postcard. I'll read the address. Take your pen and paper. His name is Tim Gaffney, T-I-M, and then Gaffney is spelled G-A-F-F-N-E-Y. And he is at P.O. Box 1254 in Flowery Branch, just like Flowery, F-L-O-W-E-R-Y, Branch, in Georgia, 30542. Please do me a favor, and everybody sends Tim a postcard. And he'll be a very happy camper, I can tell you that. Thank you very much. And then I think for right now, I'm going to change the camera and go to Jeff, and we'll see Jeff's introduction to welding and some demonstrations on John's car. If you can see here, John's car, we are looking at the empty motor compartment. John's car is ready for a engine transplant, and it looks as complicated as a heart transplant, but then it is all metal. And in the process of doing that, there's a couple things that need to be welded, and that is actually going to be part of the demonstration today. Weld these things on John's car. So thank you very much for John for hosting us and giving his car as a guinea pig. And thank you for Jeff for starting and teaching us about MIG welding. Can you hold this for a second? Then I'm going to give Jeff the microphone. Click it on your shirt. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello, good morning, everyone. So I'm Jeff Jones. I'm restoring, actually I'm setting a speed record for restoring an MGA. I'm taking longer than anybody else probably has ever done. According to lots of people, like the mailman comes by. Are you done with that car yet? I won't tell you about it. No, my wife asked about it. Anyway, I'm progressing. And I bought it as a retirement project about 5 years ago. And I didn't know anything about bodywork. And the car had a lot of rust, as most MGs do. So I enrolled at a technical school at Chattahoochee Tech in a program there called Auto Collision Repair. I had so much fun. It was me and a bunch of, early 20s guys, studying it to make a career out of it. And I was there just to learn how to work on my own car. It was so much fun. And part of that program was a couple of welding classes, and I just fell in love with welding. It's really a lot of fun. As far as my own car, people ask when I'm going to get it done, and my stock answer is I hope to get it completed before my kids take my license away. We'll see. I also want to say I am hardly an expert, and I heard someone talking earlier. They have experience with welding. I have only done MIG welding. There's other types that I'm going to just briefly describe what I've learned about them watching YouTube videos and studying it a little bit. But if anybody here can contribute, please do. Somebody used the word expert. I don't like that word. So I'll move on here. So there's different types of welding. And let's start with gas welding. And that's using a flammable gas, usually like an oxygen acetylene type gas, through a torch. One of the advantages to that kind of welding, it doesn't need electricity, so it's very portable. You can use it anywhere. And the heat coming out of the torch, or flame, heats the two pieces of metal that you're welding together. It heats them and melts them, so you can attach them to each other. I'm pretty sure you can also use a filler rod to add metal to the weld. Quite often that's needed. Probably the biggest disadvantage to gas welding is that the heat itself is not as hot as an arc. So by the time the metal gets to the melting point, the rest of the metal around what you're welding also gets hot, and that can cause distortion. Any type of welding we do can cause that distortion, and that can be a real issue. You get something welded in, and then you look at it, and the whole panel is warped in some way or another. It's not fun. Don't ask me how I know that. Another type of welding that we see on all our cars is spot welding. Spot welding you can only do spot welding, as far as I know. And that's just using two electrodes that come into the panels, push them together, sends current through, melts the metal. Very, very fast, very efficient. You don't have to clean the welds after. There's no splatter or buildup that you have to grind down. So it can be useful, but it's only for spot welding. I have spent a lot of time drilling out spot welds, and we'll talk about plug welding is what I use to put the metal back or weld it back together. Let's see, stick welding is another type where you have an electrode and again a filler rod, and that does create an arc. It's a kind of a rugged way to weld. You're not going to get really pretty welds with a stick welder. And I don't believe you can weld anything thinner than a 1/16 of an inch. So that wipes out any of us working on our little British cars, because this is thin metal that we're doing here. Then we get into, let's talk about TIG welding. TIG welding is kind of a more refined way of welding. It also uses an electrode like stick welding, but the electrode has a fine point, and you can actually, it's almost like using a pen. So you can be very intricate with it. You can follow curves in the base metal. This is what you see on exhaust systems. We have a pretty bead all the way around, or an intercooler, those kinds of things. It's kind of like, I think I'd like to try it someday, but there is a definite learning curve with TIG welding, and it can be the whole setup is a little more expensive too than the MIG welder. Let me back up. The stick welder, I said there's an electrode that creates the heat, and then a filler rod that billet bonded with flux. And flux is a material that melts with the arc and creates a gas. And that gas at the weld site shields the weld from anything in the atmosphere like oxygen, or water vapor, and other elements. Those elements can cause the welds to just break up, porosity, splatter, makes for an ugly weld. So you're usually going to need some type of either gas or a flux to eliminate that, or at least reduce it. With a TIG welder, you're also using gas, and let's see, with a TIG welder, you're also using gas, and you're using different gases for gas types of welding. So now let's get into MIG welding. And I think MIG welding is probably, for what we do, at least what I do on my farm, is by far the best choice. It's a very simple way to weld. It doesn't take long at all to learn how. That doesn't mean it doesn't take a while to get good at it. I'm still improving all the time, and, which is kind of the fun part of doing it. So let's talk about the business end of the MIG welder. MIG welders, MIG stands for metal inert gas. So you're using an inert gas. In this case, 75% argon, 25% CO2. And that gas is shielding the weld site from the atmosphere. Once again, reducing splatter, porosity, and oxidation. So what we have is a MIG is also called wire feed welding because of this wire that comes out. So let me turn this on. And when I start welding, that wire comes out. It's a consumable electrode. All the current comes through that wire. And you can see, I mean, these are thick cables carrying a lot of voltage and amperage. Once it gets to this wire, it just instantly melts, creates an arc, a tremendous amount of heat. I think I read that mild carbon steel that we're welding, it will hold, it melts at 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. An arc and a MIG welder starts at about 5,700 and goes up. So it's an instant melt. So the electrode melts, the arc melts the metal surrounding it. Therefore, this way we can weld those pieces together. And the wire also acts as a filler. It's an automatic filler that you're doing. And then this is a MIG welder equipped for gas. And you see these holes here. The gas comes out, you can hear it. Maybe you can't. The gas comes out and then comes through the nozzle. So as you're welding, the gas is coming out here, shielding the weld site from the atmosphere again. You can also get a MIG welder with flux wire. Instead of this is just standard wire, there's no flux in it. You can get a MIG welding wire that has a flux core. Same idea as the stick welder. That flux melts, creates a gas, shields the weld site. Okay? So let's look at the unit itself. This is a Lincoln. It's 230 volts. Why did I get 230 volts instead of 110? You just have a little more versatility. You can weld thin metal with this, and because of the increased voltage, you can weld much thicker metal. Come over to the side, Reinout. And this panel here will explain a little bit more too about what we're doing. So here's the wire spool that contains the wire, which is actually going to act as an electrode, because as it comes out of the nozzle, I should have pointed this out. As it comes out of the nozzle, it comes against this copper tip here, and that electrifies it. So it becomes an electrode, basically. So here's the wire, comes through, see how it's working there. And then there's a panel here that tells me what settings to use on the front. I'll show you these settings here in a second. what settings to use for the thickness of the metal that I'm using, and also for the thickness of the wire that I'm using. This is very thin wire. It's probably the thinnest wire, I think, that you can get, and it's perfect for the welding that I do on body panels and frames. But you can go to a thicker wire, and you can see you can get up to here. You can weld as thin as 24 gauge, but you can go all the way up to 1/4 inch metal, 3/8 inch metal with this welder. Never done that. I've only welded thin stuff. Okay, and this tank here holds our gas. As I mentioned, that's 75% argon, 25% CO2. And then on the front is where we adjust, according to that diagram that we're just looking at, we adjust voltage here, depending again on the thickness of the metal, the thickness of the wire that we're using. And then this is the wire speed, how fast it comes out of the nozzle, which basically controls your amperage. The combination of those two is what you're looking at to get the right setting so that your welds don't splatter too much, that they get good penetration, because you definitely want penetration. You want the weld to be strong. So setting it all up is a little tricky, at least at first, but once you get that, the welding becomes really a lot easier. Okay? What have I forgotten? Let me look at my notes. Oh yeah, I want to talk about the helmet. The greatest invention in the world for welding. This is called an auto darkening helmet. You've probably seen the welders in the old days anyway. They didn't have auto darkening, so they held the They held it up like this. They got everything lined up when they were ready, you know, drop their head down, let it come down, and then you start welding. And the arc is so bright that the lens here let them see what they were welding. With an auto darkening helmet, I'm looking through it. I have regular light. There's no filter in place. As soon as that arc forms and that flash of light, something comes across that screen instantly and darkens it, so I can then see what I'm welding. Very convenient. And you can adjust the opacity of that darkening. You can adjust how long you want to wait for it to actually darken. I want it right away, but I'm not sure why that setting is there. You can even set it to a grind setting and wear the same helmet for grinding. All right, let's talk a little bit about safety. I mentioned that arc is 5,700 degrees minimum. That's hot, and fires are not uncommon because you have that intense heat, and you're also setting off sparks. So be sure. I know all of you know this, but be sure you have a fire extinguisher handy when you're welding. I did one time set my pants on fire down at the cuff, and I didn't know it. I smelled it before I actually felt it. Some spark, something, I'm not sure what, but it can be a real issue, and you look on YouTube long enough, you'll see stories about it. Also, when you're welding, you want to grind off any paint or residue around the areas that you're welding, because paint, whatever, it's going to create fumes. You don't want to be breathing in those fumes. All right. Let's talk about a couple of different types of welding. Here, what we're going to do on John's car, we're just going to fill in these holes. The MIG welder is perfect for that because we have that wire feed. So it's supplying extra metal. So it's going to melt the metal around the hole, and the melted electrode wire is also going to add to it and fill in those holes. We'll get a little bump here. We need to grind that down. And then really, if you do it right, you won't even know that you filled it in. So that's one type of weld we're going to do. There's other types. Let's talk about a butt weld. And this is where you have two pieces of metal that come together, just like that, and you weld them together, basically. So I'm making it more complicated than it is. A plug weld, I mentioned before, if you have a spot weld and you start drilling out spot welds to remove, say, a piece of corroded metal, and now you have a new piece of metal, you want to put back where the old one was, you drill holes in your new piece of metal, you put it against your old metal, and then all you do is just, it's like filling these holes. You just put your electrode right there, it melts the metal, it melts this metal and the metal behind it, and the wire fills it in. Once again, you grind that down, you don't know you have a weld there. And the advantage of plug welds over spot welds, they are quite a bit stronger. And then the other is a lap weld. In that case, that would be a lap weld, where you're just going to overlap metal like this. And then you would come along here and weld it. And if you flange this piece of metal, which is easy to do, then you won't even know that you welded on the other side, and it'd be flush. You wouldn't even know you'd have a weld there. Same idea. The other thing I want to mention is you see all the YouTube videos and things like that where people are running beads. They're starting at this end and they're just welding all the way down and making a long continuous weld. You really can't do that, or at least I can't do it, with metal this thin, because what happens? We build up heat, like I mentioned before, then we get warpage. So we're going to do tack welds. It's also called stitch welding, where you're just going to make a tack, go to the other side, make a tack, and just make tack, 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 tack till you fill it in. And you go slow, and along the way you stop, you let the metal cool off. It's easy to get impatient, but you do it at the risk of warping the metal. You don't want to do that. All right. I think that covers it. Any questions? Anything else we need to discuss?
You cover everything.
I had a question.
Can you explain what happens if you don't have proper welding glasses?
If you don't have proper welding glasses,
Go blind.
yeah, it's not pleasant. One day I put on my just my regular face shield, thinking it was my welding helmet, and boom, you get this, I mean, brighter than the sun sort of flash in your eyes, and you see circles for a long time. You can't do it without some type of attenuation of the light. I have at times been lazy, and I got it all set up, and then I said, oh shoot, I'm not wearing my helmet. I'll just close my eyes, look away, and tack like that. But all you're gonna do is make one little spot. You want to get a decent helmet, and they're not expensive. This one is about $100. It's a Hobart. It's a decent one. Harbor Freight has them less than that, $60, I think. I started with a Harbor Freight. It lasted a couple of years, and then I got this, and I like it more.
Thank you.
Sure.
Aviva's got a question.
Thanks. I might have missed this, but I'm wondering, like the two holes you already showed under the hood, were those, they look too perfect, so they didn't just, what caused them? Were they serving some other purpose and now
Yeah.
you're trying to fill them in to change it, or?
Yeah, there's been a lot of restoration work done on this car over the years, and just people have just been drilling holes into it to fit things in. And if you get in the fender well and look up, it looks like Swiss cheese in there. So considering what we were doing with the car, we're going to rewire it. We're going to reroute the air conditioning. You know, we're putting a new, different engine in. I just figured it was a good idea to start with a kind of a blank sheet. And so Jeff was kind enough to volunteer to come and help me fill all the holes that are in there that have been drilled over the years. So some of them we are keeping. For instance, the mounting holes for the horns, we're going to keep those. And a couple of the other brackets that are going to go back on, we're going to keep those. But the rest of it was just auxiliary holes that have been filled in, drilled in over the years.
All right, thank you. Back to welding.
Okay, so let's go ahead and do a weld of John's car here to fill in this hole. I've got everything set up.
Reinout.
I should say too, all this small, we shouldn't need to back it up. But a lot of times, especially when you're butt welding, you can back it up with a piece of copper. Copper has a much higher melting point, so it keeps that arc from maybe burning through. We shouldn't need it here. Let's give it a shot. And it's just a couple of little pinholes left. One more. That's it. We would grind that down, make it flush, and you wouldn't know it's there.
Hey, Jeff, I have a question.
You got a question?
Yeah, are you creating the arc by pulling a trigger or by touching the electrode to the metal?
Are you creating the arc by pulling the trigger or by contact of the electrode?
Both.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not in contact with metal, I pull the arc. I just get that.
Did you show them the clamp that you have to put on the
Oh.
spring?
Thank you. Yeah, very important, because sometimes when you forget to put this on, you get this. You don't get the electrical circuit intact. This is actually called a lead wire, or most people call it a ground clamp, because basically that's making the connection. That has to go on a piece of metal, you know, without paint, and that fits right there.
And that's what completes the circuit.
And that completes the circuit. We also want this wire can't be this long. It has to be, it's really designed just to be about that long.
Can you show one more time? How long?
How long it is?
1/8 of an inch.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Should we do another one?
Yes, please.
Yeah, that one went better.
Quick and easy.
Getting better.
Got some practice in.
All right. I'm going to show you a, should we move on?
Yes.
And I'm going to show you now a butt weld. And here we're going to do it over here. This is the fender off my MGA. And this piece of metal that went right here, you can see it's pretty corroded. It's got holes in it. You know, now holes like this, you could not fill in without welder because that metal is compromised and it's weak. So as soon as that arc would hit that, it would just blow a bigger hole. And you end up chasing your tail, because we've all tried to do that instead of actually just cutting on a new piece and putting it in. But this piece was pretty obviously bad. So I made a new piece, which is more or less the same size. And that is what we're going to weld in to this spot. Now, hopefully, I have cut this back far enough to reach healthy metal. But, you know, in reality, this is a 60-year-old car. So not all the metal is necessarily healthy. So we may blow holes through it when we're doing a butt weld. And that's okay. I mean, you can compromise with that. You can back it up with the copper or just keep welding it back until you reach healthy metal. So you may see that happen today. The other thing is what a lot of people do, they'll use the overlap method. So let's say, for example, I was doing this section here, I would flange a piece of metal so that it would be flush, but I would overlap it up here. This way, you're just welding the edge, let's say it's like that, you're just welding the edge to that piece of metal. And then, if you've got to flange it though, or it won't be even. The unevenness will be on the opposite side. Does that make sense? Okay. There's lots of, I don't know, opinions on whether you should butt weld or lap weld, especially on an older car that you're restoring. I kind of find it a challenge to do a butt weld because I want to be able to do a weld that you won't be able to tell the metal is welded. With a lap weld, if you get up underneath and look at it, you're going to see that seam. You'll know it was a lap weld. Lap welds are much quicker, at least in my experience they are, because you don't have to be as precise with the measurement. Here you do. See, I have to cut this metal to fit just right so that there's only a little bit of a gap. We're going to talk about that in a second. But it takes a long time to get this piece of metal cut out just to the size you want. A lap weld, you can be a lot more casual about it. So it doesn't have to fit exactly. You're just going over the metal. All right. So a great trick that I learned is to use magnets to at least get things started. And then the other thing we're going to do is use these little 90-degree pieces of metal. This is aluminum. Aluminum's the right choice because it doesn't stick to the magnet. If you took steel and shaped it like this and put it right there, it would go right to the magnet, and then everything gets knocked around. So aluminum's great for this. Why am I doing this? Because I want a gap there. I want a gap so that I can ensure that I'll get proper penetration. The weld will go through the gap all the way through so I can look at the bottom of it and see that I got penetration. You don't want the weld just to attach to the top. You can do welds like that and they can be very pretty welds, but they have no strength. So you really, when you're welding, you always kind of, especially if it's something structural, you always want to look on the other side, making sure that you're getting the penetration that you need. Does that make sense?
If you're not, would you turn the voltage?
I'm putting that metal there, or I'm sorry, I'm putting those aluminum pieces there to maintain the gap, because what will happen when I start tack welding this, it draws the metal together, and then I'll get to the point, I mean, start over here, it draws it together, I no longer have separation further along the weld. Okay. I'm also going to do it here. So I need a thinner one. Let's do this.
Hold this for a second.
This is the time-consuming part.
Okay.
All right, now the next thing you really want to look at is that the metal is flush. The two pieces are flush with each other. So you can see right here, that's pretty flush. You can just feel it with your finger. Whereas over here, this part is higher. Okay, feel over here.
Yes.
It's, you don't want to weld it all the way like that, because when you grind your welds down, this weld will be fine. This weld won't be, because you'll be grinding into the metal. And you'll never get it flush or looking even. You'll always know that there was a weld there. So what we're going to do, we're going to find the even spots, and we're going to tack it, like right there. Once we tack it, we can get rid of the magnets, get rid of the aluminum strips, and then we just come over here with a small body hammer and lower it down so that it's flush, and tack it there. Once we get ensured that it's even all the way across, then we can complete the weld. Okay? Okay, here we go. We need our round clamp. Can't forget that. Nothing like live TV. Try that again.
You got your helmet on?
I want to put on some gloves. Put you right here. Okay. See how that's tacked? I can move this magnet. It's going to be hot. That's even there, so I'm going to give it another tack there. Just make sure it's connecting both pieces of metal, which it is. At this point, I can really get rid of all the magnets. Now I want to come over here and make sure it's flush before I continue. And that does, that feels flush. It's a little bit more gap than I want. I think we'll be okay. But nope. All right. John, can I borrow that camera over here? Please?
What do you need?
Let's see if we can tap this in a little bit. Well, these are the things that can go wrong. So you, I don't know why it's, let's try that again. There we go. So now at this point, it should be flush all the way across, and it is. So now I can start filling in with the stitch welding we talked about, and just, you know, go far apart as I can to try to avoid heating up the metal too much. It's really hot, and again, sometimes you got to just stop and let it cool off a little bit. And then I would also at this point use the backup thing. I just put it like right there.
Did you explain what that is and why you use
Yeah,
it?
there's a piece of copper, so it has a higher melting point. So I can put it behind the weld. It won't stick to the metal because it doesn't melt, but it just keeps the power of that arc from going all the way through and burning a hole. I mean, butt welding like we're doing here can be quite challenging, and this is one of the challenges. John, can you hold this?
Yeah. You weld in this direction maybe better than across.
What's that?
Is it better for you to weld in this direction than across?
Mm-hmm.
I'll move the camera so you stand where you need to stand.
Yes. There we go. So now I've got the stitch welding going, and I can just keep filling it in like we're doing.
Show it, yes. Great.
Let's do a few more. So here's an example where it is going into this original metal and it's just not holding. It's a little bit too weak for it. It's not going to be a problem. So, yeah, let's just go ahead and put it back all the way where you have it. Further this way, toward where you may have it. Tell you what, do it this way. Yeah. Don't touch that.
You don't have to tell me twice.
No, it's not quite right. Let's see. Now we got welds on the other side. Yeah, okay, let's do that. Okay. So once we get a few good tacks, we can just tack against the tack and extend it this way. So this is what I was saying. If this metal is not holding up quite as well as we would like, we can just tack to existing weld, which is healthy metal, and then just continue and fill it in that way.
Are you going to try to do that with this one here?
Sure. It can be a long process. Before we go too far, we also need to grind these welds down because you can see how they're raised up. So if I'm trying to go in between, like here, where there's two raised welds, what can happen is you end up welding onto one of the elevated parts of that weld, and you make a bridge. So you're not actually welding the metal below it, which is what you want to be welding. So if you grind that down, then it exposes everything, makes it flush again, and then you can continue the weld that way.
Good.
Anytime you're MIG welding, as far as I know anyway, you're going to be grinding off the welds. I talked earlier about welding a bead. You see that a lot in TIG welding. It's such a pretty way to weld. You can run a bead with a MIG welder too, but again, it creates a lot of heat. And so thin metal like this, it just doesn't work. I don't think I've ever run a bead on any of the MGA work that I've done. It's all stitch welding like this. I think that's it.
Do you want to do the big round hole?
Big long hole.
Round hole.
The big one?
Yeah, you want to show them what we did with that?
So John had a hole here. I think there was an air conditioning hose through it. So I cut out a piece of metal and put it there and started welding this in and ground down some of those welds. So you can see what I was talking about before. If they were raised up and I would to continue welding, I could just make a bridge across two of those elevated welds.
So what you did is you cut a disc the same diameter as the almost the same diameter as the hole.
Right.
And then we fit it in there, and then you tack welded it in there.
Exactly.
And then started stitching it.
And started stitching. And I wanted a little bit of a gap for the same reason. I want that weld to go all the way through to the other side. And so we just have to keep on doing this. The metal here sometimes failed too, and I had to weld to another weld. But it's starting to fill in nicely. At this point, we won't have any trouble completing it. Should we do a little more?
Yes, please.
At this point, I want to let it cool off a bit.
That's a wet rag next to your hand.
These wires, by the way, we really wouldn't want them there, or we want to shield them, but John's already said he's going to get rid of them. So we don't need to worry about damaging them. There you go. You see along the bottom now? It's pretty much sealed off. We would grind those down. There was actually a lot of body filler here. So we would want to grind those welds down, make them even, wipe it with body filler.
Great. That's probably it, right? Sort of.
What's that?
That's about it, huh?
That's about it.
Can you hold this for a second? Let me check it.
One other thing, John had told me, I bought this welder because I took the car somewhere to get some battery brackets welded in because they were rusty and they wanted to charge me $450. And I said, well, the car needs a lot more welding than just battery brackets. So I decided then to buy a welder, which wasn't that much more than that. And but a lot of people don't need a welder just for maybe a simple repair job, like filling in a hole, like what we're doing here. But John had mentioned he found a place that rents them. I never thought you could rent a welder.
Yeah, North Side Tool Rental.
So if you did all your prep work ahead of time, you know, cleaned up the areas so you have metal, or if you're replacing metal, you've already cut it out and fabricated a new piece to go there. If all that's prepared beforehand, you get a lot of welding done in a day. I think it was like $50.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
Or you can,
that doesn't include the learning curve that you want to do, maybe you want to practice.
or they can just call you and let you do the work.
Especially, again, if you're using healthy metal.
They could just
There
call
were,
you.
there
and
were
let
two
you do the
questions.
work.
One is, would you leave those burn marks, or how do you clean them, or do you just paint over them?
The burn marks are going to go away when we grind down the welds. Okay, I usually use a flat disc on an angle grinder like this. You can use, get into tighter spots. I use this little belt sander. I think this is a 40 grit belt. That's a 40 grit. So when you grind down the welds, well, you can see we started doing it here. That all those burn marks and everything and the welds are going to go away, leaving behind shining metal. And again, if you do it right, and I'm getting to the point I do it right maybe most of the time, you can't tell there was a weld there. That's always the goal, at least for me. I don't want to know, I don't want somebody to look at that and say, oh yeah, you welded it here.
Can we just demonstrate weld one of those holes? Yeah. Grind one of those holes, please. Grinding has its own set of safety measures. One of them is ear protection, because grinders are noisy and they spark around, so it's always good to have either regular glasses or safety glasses.
Better put them on there. And there's lots of different ways of grinding welds. This, I think, is one of the faster ways. If you have air tools, there's all kinds of things you get for your air tools to do it.
Nice and shiny now. You can barely see that there was a weld. Of course, you have to use a little bit of body filler and primer, and you can paint right over it.
The other thing you can do is use a finer, follow it up with a finer grit, and then even polish it. Because I've seen people do that, and you really can't tell there was a weld there.
The other question on the thing was, would it be helpful to have a spray bottle with water to help it cool down?
Yeah, and that wet rag.
Yeah, John has a wet rag here. We did that. You know, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if it causes an issue with cooling the metal too fast. Maybe it makes it brittle. I really don't know. I have not seen people do that on the YouTube videos I've watched. But it's one of these things, you do have to be patient. And like the part here I was talking about, getting this metal level before you start welding in a new spot. It's easy to just get in a hurry and say, oh, it's good enough. You know, you won't be happy if you do that. So sometimes you do have to just say slow down.
We did it because there's undercoating on the other side of the fender, and every once in a while it would catch fire while Jeff was welding. So that was one of the reasons we kept that close by.
And I can tell from experience that it is indeed not a good idea to cool the metal too quick. It becomes, it shrinks, first of all. It's a technique used to take dents out of panels, and it becomes brittle. It becomes very hard. It will break and tear eventually. It's not a good idea. Let it cool down by itself so it stays flexible. Let me see if there's any other questions. Sorry, I'll walk around with the camera. I don't think we have any more questions. If you guys have a question, let me know. I do not know what time it is, but if we don't have any further questions, we'll...
I had one more question. Was the argon used for this welding?
Was that a question or?
Yeah, yes. What was the argon used today?
It's an inert gas, so it's not flammable in any way, and it blows,
No.
it pushes away the
Yes,
atmospheric
but
gases like oxygen, water vapor, other things that will contaminate your weld. So
But
either
was
you
it
use
used?
gas or you use wire with flux. Now, I didn't mention this about flux. Flux, again, it melts, creates a gas, shields the weld site from the atmosphere, but it creates its own contaminant, which is called slag. And then you have to scrape the slag off, you chip it off, or use a wire brush. So it's not the prettiest weld, but it can be. And all the welds that I'm doing here, all the welds that I'm doing here are being ground down. Again, I'm trying to hide the fact that it was ever welded. If I was trying to make a very, very pretty weld, yeah, then maybe the flux is not the best choice. And the ultimate would be a TIG welder. But you can make pretty welds using a MIG as long as the metal can support that kind of heat.
Can you say something about adjusting the argon? Is it just as critical as adjusting the acetylene and oxygen when you do torch welding?
You buy the tank with the ratio that you want. So that tank has 75% argon, 25% CO2. And that's what's on that panel that we looked at. That type of gas is a very, very common gas for MIG welding.
And the pressure?
The pressure in the tank is, fixed by the tank and how much they put in it. But the pressure that I'm using coming out of the nozzle is around 15 psi. You can adjust that. You just want enough gas to come out to push away the atmosphere.
The weld does not get any better or less good when you do more argon. You just protect it better than needed.
Right. No. Yeah, it's just a matter of dispelling the gas, the atmosphere that's there. The oxygen and water vapor primarily, from what I read.
If you do oxygen and acetylene welding, it's very critical to have the right amount of pressure for both to direct the flame and direct the heat.
To get the heat
Yes.
maximum,
Yes.
right?
Alrighty, any other questions? If not, then we're gonna close this session today I'd like to thank John for all his expertise and hosting the
Jeff's expertise.
Reinout?
his car, guinea pigging his car and being the host here. Of course,
Hey, Reinout.
I want to thank John, Jeff for the welding explanation and for giving the demonstrations. We're going to have another Zoom tech session, hopefully soon. I'm still debating the topic. There's 2 or 3 topics that come to mind that we can do in a couple of weeks. If everything went well, Aviva, our president, is recording this session, and hopefully we can put it on our YouTube channel. Everybody knows, I hope, what YouTube is. We encourage you to take a quick look, even if you don't spend the time to see this whole show or one of the previous tech sessions. Just go to YouTube, Google Peachtree MG. These tech sessions pop up and then say you like them and you subscribe to the channel. That's important for us to get a better standing within the YouTube world. Other than that, thank you very much for staying here. Thank you very much for your questions and your attention. And hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you learned a little bit. I did. And we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Reinout.
Yes.
Hey, a question for John.
Yeah.
John?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your conversion. What are you doing?
Well, what we're doing is we're converting it to a 3.4 liter V6 that came out of a 95 Firebird. And so I was able to locate an engine and transmission for donor. I'm having the transmission rebuilt, but I bought a short block from Anderson Racing in Missouri.
Do you have it there?
No, actually, I'm picking it up on Monday.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, if you want to see the old block is sitting outside. But right now I'm in the process of test fitting the engine because, well, since Reinout's got the camera, there you can see the short block strip with the bell housing, and this conversion kit is pretty simple, except that you have to relieve some areas within the firewall. And if Reinout's got the camera, what you have to do is to make clearance for the driver's side exhaust manifold, you have to relieve this area in here. You also have to relieve some area in here to clear the bell housing. And there's another spot down in here that I haven't quite figured out exactly where it is to relieve that. And then if you look a little bit over here, this is one of the motor mount brackets that you buy in the kit.
Okay.
And it's partially installed. And that's where I am right now. I'm going to pick up the engine on Monday, and Eric is coming over to help me test fit to see if I've got this hammered out enough.
When you say relieve, you mean a big hammer, right?
Yeah, and I just bought a 4-pound hammer. So the thing that I like about this conversion kit is I've seen enough guys on the forums that have done this conversion, and in a number of cases, especially people whose opinion that I trust, they didn't do anything with the brakes. They didn't have to do anything with the suspension. I think the biggest issue in this conversion, if it has to do with the transmission, the standard transmission that's attached to this engine doesn't have good gearing in relationship to the rear end that's in the MG. So you've got one of two choices. You either have to change the rear end or change the gearing in the T5 transmission. And I found it, believe it or not, I found a guy in Lawrenceville that specializes in rebuilding T5 Mustang transmissions. And that's the gearing that you use out of a Mustang. So that's where we are right now.
Hey, John?
Yeah.
Have you spoken to Charles up in Tennessee?
Yes, I have spoken with Charles a little bit. And I've also spoken with Phil Osborne and a couple of other people who have done this conversion. So Charles did a great job. And the biggest challenge, frankly, the biggest challenge so far has had to do with the wiring harness for the fuel injection. But I think I've got it figured out now.
What sort of horsepower are you expecting or hoping for?
162 horsepower and 200 foot-pounds of torque, which is, I mean, I'm not doing anything to the engine at all. I'm going to keep it as completely stock as possible.
Ah, cool. So when did you make this decision?
Back in the fall. You know, this car was restored in the 90s, and the paint was starting to crack, and you know, it's got some issues. So I figured I'd pull the engine so that we repaint the whole car, and then the engine was a little bit suspect, but I knew I'd have to rebuild the engine, and I just figured the cost of having the 4-cylinder rebuilt wasn't going to be any less than, I wasn't going to save any money.
Yeah.
By going to a fuel injection, by making the conversion. So, you know, so we're going to rewire it, put new electrics in it, and a couple of other things, and then repaint it. So that's where I started to talk with Jeff. I got inside the wheel well on the right-hand side of the car, and it looked like Swiss cheese in there. We figured
figured out a way to seal up the holes, and the best way to do it is to weld them in. Any other questions?
That's great. Can't wait to see it.
Okay, and Linton, Penny just took the Jaguar to go grocery shopping.
Say again.
Penny just took the Jaguar to go grocery shopping.
Oh, did you?
We still have it.
Yeah, we have ours too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else, any questions? All righty then, thank you very much, and see you around next time. Bye-bye.